Greetings. Thanks to everyone for coming out to our group author reading. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and other underrepresented gender identity authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly virtual QuickRead sessions. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout we've provided in the chat and by visiting our website, a link to which will be added to the chat. I'd also like to take a moment to thank those who have made a tip jar donation. We appreciate that so much. Thanks very much. I'm your host today, Sarah Smith, and you can find out more about me in the provided handout, as well as our stellar authors. Please note that recording of this session by the audience isn't allowed, and recording of electronic communications, including Zoom meetings and webinars without permission, is illegal anyway. Today we'll be featuring 6 authors: Karen Eisenbrey, Geneve Flynn, S.E. Smith, another Smith, Theresa Derwin, Adeena Mignogna, and Vida Cruz-Borja. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. Our first reader is Karen Eisenbrey. Karen Eisenbrey lives in Seattle, Washington, where she leads a quiet, orderly life and invents stories to make up for it. Karen writes fantasy and science fiction novels, as well as short fiction and the occasional poem or song, if it insists. Karen, take it away.
Thank you. I will be giving away a paperback copy of Ego and Endurance, which is not even out yet, but I have my copies. And I'm going to read from the first chapter. It was love at first sight. The ship, blocky and basic and bristling with greebles, wasn't anyone's idea of pretty. But to Ruby Ladd, she was the only thing on the whole moon worth looking at. Diagrams and models couldn't compare to her first glimpse of the real thing. Ruby bounded across the bright, pale surface for a closer look. The cargo transport Polaris had been completely remodeled for this expedition. Just behind the forward viewport, in crisp black letters, the ship displayed her new name, Endurance. On a mission this long, they'd need it. Ruby presented her credentials to the guard at the hatch and entered the airlock. When the light changed from red to green, she opened the inner hatch and stepped into the ship proper. Ruby hung her helmet on a rack beside the hatch and made her way to her quarters to change into her uniform. A faint thud drifted up the passage from the direction of the galley. A maze of transport bins slowed Ruby down, fresh and pre-cooked food that had not yet been stowed. "How long do you estimate it will take to put all this away?" Ruby called as she entered the galley. "We launch at..." A disheveled man in a spacesuit sprawled on the deck. He inhaled with a resonant snore that might have roused the dead, but did not wake him. He clutched an empty tequila bottle like a teddy bear. "Hey!" She shook his shoulder. He snorted and peered at her through half-opened eyelids. "What are you doing here?" "I'm the cook," he slurred. "I'm the cook, ma'am." His brows drew together in a puzzled frown. "No, you're not. I am. And don't call me ma'am. Good night." He closed his eyes again and rolled onto his side. Before he could snore again, Ruby nudged his ribs with her booted foot. "I'm the expedition commander. You're supposed to call me ma'am." He opened his eyes wide. "Oh, Your lad? He sat up. Yes, and you are? Green, ma'am. Lloyd Green. I'm the cook. You mentioned that. You're also drunk. Yes, ma'am. I was nervous. Never been on such a long mission before. It won't happen again. You're right about that. Please leave the ship at once, Mr. Green. Yes, ma'am. When shall I report back for launch? You misunderstand. You're fired. He struggled to his feet and staggered out of the galley. Transport bins thumped and clattered as he bumped into them on his way down the passage, and again as he returned. Commander Ladd, ma'am, I have to tell you something. He frowned and scratched his head. No, you don't. Now get off my ship. She escorted him to the airlock, personally secured his gloves and helmet, and made sure the guard knew Green was not allowed back on Endurance. When she arrived on the bridge, Captain Frank Anderson grinned and rose from his seat. Welcome aboard, boss. I like the sound of that. You've earned it. Anderson smiled down at her. Like most adults, he was a good deal taller than Ruby. It's a beautiful day on the moon. It's always a beautiful day on the moon, Skipper. Cutting it a little close, though. We launch tomorrow. I was afraid we might have to leave without you. He winked. Ha ha. I was a little worried myself, but the bean counters had to balance the books before they'd let me go. They both sat and faced the forward viewport, gloriously filled with the bright moonscape against the black of space. So how do things look? Excellent. I can hardly wait to take this ship out. He beamed. It's a trash hauler, she teased. A souped-up trash hauler with lots of cool new toys, Anderson corrected. Here's the final expedition roster. He brought up the list. A party of 12? Funny, Ruby had been thinking 11. She had selected the captain and first officer herself and trusted Anderson to put together a solid crew. There was a bit of a problem with the cook. Ruby snorted. Tell me about it. He frowned. You heard already? She hesitated. Maybe not. What was your problem? I had someone all lined up, very experienced. She was supposed to meet us here a week ago, but she fell and tore up the ligaments in her knee. He shook his head. Can you imagine if we had to scrub the mission because we didn't have a cook? The role isn't exactly mission critical, Ruby said. Most of the food is heat and serve. Regulations, though, were required to have someone with the right permits. It worked out anyway. I was able to hire one of the cooks here at Armstrong, a guy named Lloyd Green. He comes highly recommended. Now Ruby's count was down to 10. Yeah, about that. I just fired him. Sorry. Anderson stared. But we launch tomorrow. There's no time to find another. Who'll do the cooking? Ruby shrugged. I will if necessary. It's not that hard. But the permits. Funny thing. Ruby held up her Skycom and displayed a document. Anderson allowed himself a smile. What are you doing with a food handler's permit? You wouldn't believe all the permits I have. Every time I get fed up with the suits, I earn or renew another certificate. Keeps me sane and out of trouble. The captain shook his head. So you really just boarded the ship and fired the cook? Ruby patted his shoulder. Green wasn't going to work out. He was dead drunk in the galley. Said he was nervous about the trip. She frowned. You say he came highly recommended. What missions has he been on? None. He was cooking here at the spaceport for the last month. Before that, he worked in several restaurants planetside. She groaned. Well, no wonder he was nervous. I'm sorry, I should have talked to you first. He shook his head. No, you're the boss. Ruby returned her attention to the roster. Now, who's this H. Gunner? I thought you knew, Anderson said. The name seems familiar, but I didn't hire him. Why do we need a documentarian? I can tell you now, we don't have room for a whole camera crew. Ruby gazed at the name on the roster and thought back to her meetings with the money people. That was the extra person. They had an idea for making a profit, even if the expedition failed. But this was beyond anything she'd imagined. I might know, she said. I just hope I'm wrong. Thank you.
And is she wrong? Oh, no, she's misreading it. Understating it. Thank you, Karen. Our second reader is Geneve Flynn. Geneve Flynn is a two-time Bram Stoker Award and Shirley Jackson Award winning editor, author, and poet. Her works have been nominated and shortlisted for the British Fantasy, Ditmar, Aurealis, Australian Shadows, Elgin, and Riesling Awards, and the Pushcart Prize. She is a recipient of the 2022 Queensland Writers' Fellowship. Genevieve, it's all yours.
Thank you. I'm going to read from my story, Lidless Eyes at Sea, that I'm very pleased to say has been shortlisted for the Aurealis Award, and it appears in From the Wasteland. So first, a bit about the inspiration behind the story. All through Eliot's poem, there are themes of brokenness and loss, of culture, of memory, of connection. He wrestles with war, moral decay, and resurrection. These grim images created a backdrop for my horror tale about a woman and a boy, and the story they tell each other over and over again as they try to survive a post-apocalyptic world. For my story, I was inspired by Eliot's line, pressing lidless eyes and waiting for a knock upon the door. Instead of a weary couple battling insomnia, I imagined a character waiting with dread for a final knock. I was always also struck by the line, "Who was the third who walks always beside you?" I began to ask myself if we are truly alone, and who might walk beside us in silence. This gave me my first line. We are silently going mad, the boy and I. I dreamt the opening image of a boy handing a woman a silk handkerchief containing broken dentures. At the time of writing, I also took a workshop with Karen Warren, one of Australia's most celebrated horror authors, and the motifs of the teeth and iron spike were born. Here we go. We are silently going mad, the boy and I. The first sign was when he brought me the red silk handkerchief. It was folded and tied like the most perfect furoshiki cloth wrapping, as if he meant to give me something precious, something with meaning. Here is what I found instead. 7 pieces of a broken denture, fragments of palate, glistening pink as freshly chewed bubblegum, and wire that still shone gold, cradling teeth as jagged and yellow as fossilized popcorn. With a wordless cry, I crushed them under my boot, grinding the molars to ochre pebbles and chalk. He did not seem to mind and returned to picking his way carefully through the ruins of the supermarket. A month ago, I found him in a playground, both of us slat-sided and ravenous. We stared at each other, a small dark-eyed boy in a man's too large jacket, and me, a woman who had become nothing but dry bones. He didn't say a word. Whether the mutism was selective or inborn, it made no difference. No matter how much I questioned, cajoled, or tried to catch him unawares, he did not speak. At first, the disappointment hollowed me as powerfully as the endless hunger. I had been alone since the final days of the war. To have someone, anyone to talk with, to feel some remnant of my humanity, would have been as much a boon as discovering an untouched cache of tin peaches in an abandoned house. Before long, though, his simple presence proved enough, and I fell back into the habit of silence. We learned to hunt. He was faster than I and as a child, swifter to reclaim the animal instincts we have forgotten as a species. Often he would take a rabbit or a snake with his teeth and be halfway through its neck before I caught up. The meager game wasn't enough, and we spent our days hiking from one dusty town to the next, searching lonely houses that echoed with memories and darkened stores with shattered windows for anything we could eat. On the rare occasions we came across other people, his hackles would ripple and he'd drag me to the ground, where we huddled until whoever it was had passed. I never questioned him. He had a fine nose for danger and knew what and who could be trusted. Later that night, with nothing to show from the supermarket and hunger coring us both, we curled together in the parlour of a turn-of-the-century Queenslander at the edge of town, its rotting, creaking boards enough to warn us if someone approached. Any mattresses and blankets from the bedrooms had long been scavenged, and only the skeletons of small reptiles and hard pellets of rat scat remained. The chill crept up from the gaps in the floor and in through the glasses windows. A gum tree rustled its ghostly leaves outside. Everything else was still. I shivered against his small form, but the boy seemed immune to the cold. Tell me a story, I thought. A wish upon a star, nothing more. To my surprise, he turned and studied me, his eyes like liquid mirrors reflecting the moonlight. A single considered nod, then he snuggled back against me and fell asleep. A quiet knock sounds at the front door, barely there, as if it didn't really happen. Sunlight streaming through the windows, the day's humidity and heat suddenly pressing against my skin. The boy's gone, an empty space between my arms, even though I had folded them around him in my sleep. Across from me is the denture, whole and gleaming. It sits inside a wooden bowl which has been nailed to the floor with a thick iron stake, about 6 inches in length and black with oxidization. Around the false jaw, cracked plastic containers and toy fragments are arranged in the unmistakable shape of a human skull. There's a nose, a chin, rudimentary ears, even wiry doll hair, but no eyes. Sweat springs on my upper lip and prickles down my spine. I creep to my feet and peer through the doorway to the darkened hall, careful to tread close to the wall. The boards protest quietly. The house feels empty, apart from the facsimile mind behind me, watching my back with its empty sockets. It isn't alive. I know that. I do. It grins with pink gums and yellow teeth. With a grunt, I rush forward and claw at the pieces of plastic and broken remnants that once belonged to children, hurling them into the shadow corners of the room and out the window. I yank at the dentures, but hiss, snapping my hand back. Did they bite me? No, it was only a sharp edge on the nail head. A cut jags across my palm. Blood wells. It's deep. I really should get a tetanus shot. It wouldn't do to die from being unable to eat. Laughter bubbles up in my throat and fills my mouth, but I swallow it down. I'll have to go back into town to find something to bandage my hand. Perhaps the boy is already there, searching for food. He's disappeared before, sometimes for an hour, sometimes the whole day, but he always returns. He always finds me. I glance at the set of teeth. They aren't going anywhere. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Genevieve. Our third reader is S.E. Smith. S.E. Smith is a New York Times, USA Today, and international award-winning best-selling author of science fiction, paranormal fantasy, young adult, and contemporary action romance stories that pull readers into worlds that transport them away. Go, Susan.
Hi, everyone. This is from Gracie's Touch, my reader's choice for me to read tonight. Gracie let her head fall back simply because she no longer had the strength to hold it up. She was freezing, could hardly breathe as the oxygen levels were dropping dramatically, and weak from blood loss. The tears in her suit were hindering the suit's ability to keep her warm. Ladera raised a weak hand and laid it on Gracie's shoulder when Mohan's faint voice urgently repeated that help was on the way. "You did it, Gracie," Ladera sent the message across the screen from behind her. "You brought everyone home like you said you would." Gracie was too tired to respond. One slow tear coursed down her cheek when she heard Mohan's voice. Corin would know that she had tried to come back to him. She only had a few more minutes of power in the damaged suit. She put the helmet back on to help retain heat and to use the power of the suit to patch into the fighter. It was a huge drain on it, but it was the only way she could get the communications back online long enough to send out an SOS. But it came at a price. It drained her suit and its life support capabilities. "Gracie, your suit level is low. I can see it on the screen in my helmet. You must patch into mine. We will share until they get here," Ladera sent an alarm. "Not yet," Gracie sent weakly. "I have a little time, 10 minutes, maybe more if I use shallow breaths. I don't want to drain you as well." Ladera leaned forward and placed her hand on Gracie's uninjured shoulder. "You must promise to connect with me before you run out. If you do not, I will try," Ladera sent across Gracie's helmet again. Gracie let her head move in a weak nod of agreement. She just needed to hang on for a little longer. Shivers shook her body as it attempted to keep warm. Every violent shake sent waves of pain through her as her injured arm and leg protested the movement. Luckily, she thought, as her vision became fuzzy, it seemed like the bleeding had stopped, or at least slowed down some. What seemed like hours later, Gracie's head jerked when she felt a thump on the outside of the fighter. She was down to less than 2 minutes of air, and the helmet was flashing a warning. Gracie turned her head slowly and looked through the clear viewport window of the fighter. About 25 feet away was one of the Conqueror's fighters. Gracie could make out who was in the pilot's seat, but everything in her body was screaming it was Corden. He had come for her. Gracie weakly raised her uninjured arm and splayed her hand on the window to let him know that she knew he was near. That last bit of effort was more than her body could handle. Gracie's vision went dark, and she slumped forward as the last of her oxygen ran out. Dreams were often a strange and wonderful thing, Gracie thought vaguely, as she drifted in a warm cocoon of darkness. Flashes of light, strange and familiar voices, strong arms, a deep voice threatening to whip her butt if she gave up, floated through Gracie's mind as she drifted between wakefulness, life, and death. Perhaps death wasn't so bad, Gracie thought. A deep growl and firm hands on her face told her she must have said that out aloud. "Death is not better. Do you hear me, Gracie? Death is an option, not an option. You will fight. You will live," Corden growled hoarsely. Gracie could feel his hot breath against her cheek as he leaned closer to her ear. She couldn't seem to get any more words out, so she squeezed the hand holding her uninjured one. She would fight. This one last time, she would fight. Then she was going to sleep for a very, very long time. A frown creased her forehead. Why was she so tired? The thought faded as fingers gently caressed her forehead until the frown was gone. The touch felt so good, Gracie couldn't help but try to lean into it. "Admiral, I need to get her to medical as soon as possible," a light, feminine voice said. "I have her stable for now, but she needs additional healing that I cannot do here." Corden nodded and reluctantly released Gracie's hand as the medical staff began moving Gracie out of the triage that had been set up in the landing bay. Corden stiffened when Gracie made a slight whimpering sound at the loss of his touch. One of the other medical staff was checking Ladera over to make sure she wasn't hurt. Corden paused when he felt the light touch on his arm. Turning, he looked at Ladera. She is an extraordinary woman. I hope she will be all right. Corden nodded briefly. She will be. See that this woman is given quarters, food, and fresh clothing, Corden ordered the medical technician before he turned to leave. Bran, you have the bridge. I will be in medical should you need me. Send me the reports on the ship as soon as it is done and plan for a course for Paulus, Corden ordered as the lift opened, and he stepped in. We should be finished in another 10 hours. I'll get the reports to you immediately. I also have the data collected from the Eleuthian mothership that we were able to download before it exploded. If not for Gracie's understanding of their programming, we wouldn't have gotten so far. I am still analyzing their weapons and engineering. Corden told Tolis the information on their organic DNA, and he is reviewing the robotic part of them. We will get you that preliminary report as soon as we can as well, Bran said as the lift opened onto the level containing the medical unit. Corden nodded. His mind was not on the Conqueror or even the Eleuthians any longer. It was solely focused on Gracie. He knew he needn't worry about the Conqueror. They could run the warship without him for a little while. That was why he had chosen the crew he had. 3 days later, Gracie's brain finally decided it had enough sleep and was ready to wake up. She had been conscious part of the time over the last couple of days, but she just didn't have the strength to respond. It was like her body had said enough was enough, and it was going to do what it wanted for a little while. She heard Mohan's soft voice and felt the soft fur from her hands as she brushed over Gracie's face or hands when she touched her. In the background, she knew Corden was there. He never left her except to take care of his personal needs. He always returned within what seemed like minutes. She heard people coming in and asking Corden questions or him giving orders, but he was always near enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin against hers. She liked it when he talked to her. He told her about growing up on Zion and how beautiful it was. He told her about his home there and how he was going to take her there after she woke up. He said his favorite color was green now because of her eyes. Her lips actually twitched at that. She would never have realized the tough exterior of the warrior was a cover for a romantic interior. He was always touching her, either her face or her hands or her hair. It didn't matter. She loved it and would unconsciously move toward it, seeking more. And that is just a sample of Gracie's touch.
Thank you so much, SE. Our fourth reader is Theresa Derwin. Theresa Derwin writes horror, dark comedy. She has just achieved her MA degree in creative writing. She is the 2019 Horror Writers of America Mary Shelley Scholarship recipient, and she has over 60 anthology acceptances, 4 collections, and she has edited 10 anthologies. Go for it, Theresa.
Thank you for having me. I will warn you that I'm recovering from a little chest infection type thing, so I am a little bit huskier than I normally would be. Okay, I'm reading from Shift Left for Love, and this story actually got me on the Ellen Datlow list for 2021 for my first time ever, which was fantastic. I was very chuffed to bits, especially because it contains romance, which, given where we were during the pandemic, I wanted to add a bit of fun to some of my horror. So here we go. Shift Left for Love. Tabitha toddled over to the play area, nervous but wanting to at least try to be with the regular kids on her first day of primary school. Her mum, tears in her bright blue eyes, had whispered, "Try, Tabby. Try to be normal. For Mummy, please." Then she left in her expensive car, not once looking out at her 4-year-old daughter, who had trembling lips. Tabby walked across the massive playground to the sandbox. Shortly after, a shadow passed across her. She looked up to see a 4-year-old boy with bright, furiously red hair looming over her. He leaned over, sniffed, then pushed her forward onto the grotty sand. She fell face first into the sandpit, spluttering tiny pale legs kicking up in the air as she bawled, before flopping onto her back, pink knickers showing. The boy stuck his tongue out at her. "Pooh face!" Then, for no reason her young mind could fathom, he said, "Me, Josie, you smell funny." Anger soared through Tabby's veins, her chubby hands making little fists. She climbed awkwardly to the edge of the sandpit, stumbled forward screaming, "Big pooh face!" and pushed him back. A little blonde doll, Elisa, ran over to Tabby as she curled into a ball, crying, not understanding why the Josephs seemed to hate her. Mrs. Yo-Yo, the primary teacher, ran over to the cluster of children. "What happened?" she asked, voice firm as she leaned over to check the grazies they both sported. "Miss Yo-Yo? Him," Tabby wailed. "Oh, sorry." Sitting up to point at the boy who shook his head from side to side. Elisa nodded, pointed, and Miss Yo-Yo shook her head in dismay. "Josie O'Rourke, tell me what happened, please." "Oh, thought Tabby. She's using the voice." Elisa and Tabby became instant BFFs. Josie never pushed Tabby again, though he did have a terrible habit of teasing her from then on. Adult Tabitha snickered, then sighed, a deep pang of emptiness and loss as she remembered the last time Joseph tried to tease her. Her little plan for revenge, then him moving away with no warning after his last attack, the one she thought at first that she had caused. Tall, rangy and freckled, 14-year-old Joseph was still cute as far as Tabitha was concerned. It annoyed her that she kind of liked him despite his proverbially pulling her pigtails. No, she'd never been a pigtail kind of girl. In fact, like some of the other girls, she would watch the boys playing football. Every now and again, the ball would fly their way, and they'd duck to avoid broken noses. She'd catch it easy, then throw it back. But for some reason, Joseph found it funny to run straight back to her with it, like he was bestowing on her the ultimate gift. He'd grin and drop it at her feet, wink and stand there watching until she threw it back onto the pitch. Yeah, he'd been a weird one, but she still liked him, even when he was annoying her. Their school hijinks were infamous, Elisa watching eagerly to find out who would throw the next punch. Tabitha's finest and worst hour was the day of the sandwich battle. It was lunch hour, and as usual, she had found a bench outside and Joseph had followed her like a lost puppy. "Hey, how's life at the morgue?" "Life," he yelled, grabbing a seat on a bench and opening his packed lunch. "I don't know, where's your pot of gold, you idiot?" she snapped back at him. "Clarification, I'm Irish and my background is..." "Yeah, two could play at that game," she thought. Tabitha watched covertly, smirking as he unwrapped his sandwich and bit into it. Instantly he started gagging, choking on the sandwich. Then he spit out the remains of mulch bread and something grey and slimy, glaring at Tabitha. "You cow!" He jumped up, his face ruddy, teeth bared at her as he pulled a wriggly, muddy worm out of his lunchbox. Tabitha blew him a kiss and snorted, looking forward to the next battle. But Joseph started coughing again, sweat pouring from his flushed skin. "Oh shit," she breathed, dashing over to him and smacking his back loudly. "I'm sorry, Jojo. Please don't die on me." "Not dying yet, Morticia," he growled, between chugging in great gasps of air. Then, "Phone Mom." "Mom? Mom? He wants his mom." Head hung over, his eyes flashing from green to gold, rolling back. Tabitha gasped, panic nearly overwhelming her. What if he was allergic to worms? Oh, crap. Grabbing his rucksack, she opened it, emptying everything onto the wooden table, finally spotting his silver flip phone. Ambulance, she yelled, watching Joseph's already flushed skin turn redder. Mom! Okay, hang on, it'll be okay. She was crying now, blindly hitting the contacts and calling Marie, his mom. Joe, honey, what? No, it's Joseph. I think it's a seizure, please. It's okay, hon. We're coming. Tabitha dropped the phone and started to run towards the teacher on duty until a firm hand grasped hers. She waited with him, watched as his breathing finally calmed down, and his mum, a glamorous woman in heels with a mass of curly hair, arrived and shooed her away. The next day in class, Miss Guinan announced he wasn't coming back to school. His family had moved away. Shift left for love. How may I help you? A husky female voice asked. Tabitha's heavy breathing echoed down the phone line. Hello, the woman asked. Maybe she thinks I'm a stalker. That is, Tabitha mumbled. Her palms were getting sweaty, and she'd only just dialed the damn number on the advice of Alyssa, her BFF, who'd acquired her latest boyfriend for a new dating company. Don't worry, Petal, the voice on the phone said. I'm Natalia. It's difficult for everyone the first time. That's it that I'm reading for the moment, just to give you a little bit of a hook into the story. You can probably guess from the title, Shift Left for Love, that there is a little bit of some sort of shift going on, especially as it's in the anthology Wear Tales from Bridget Gates Press. Speaking of, my giveaway is a paperback of Daughter of Sarpedon. There's a bunch of wonderful authors in that book, and they're all Medusa reimaginings. And my Medusa reimagining starts in a viewing of Clash of the Titans at an old cinema. So, I think I'm out of time, and that's up for me. And thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, Theresa. That was disgusting, and I say it with admiration. Our fifth reader is Adeena Mignogna, reading from Crazy Foolish Robots. Adeena Mignogna is the author of the Robot Galaxy series. She's an engineer working in aerospace and a long-time science fiction geek with a strong desire to inspire others through speaking and writing about robots, AI, aliens, virtual reality, and all things geekish. Adeena, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. So tonight I'm going to be reading a chapter from my book, Crazy Foolish Robots. Now, previously in the book, we're introduced to my main human character, Ruby Palmer, who is 19 years old and living on a space station in the middle of the asteroid belt. But now this chapter that I'm going to read is in a different point of view, that of one of the robots referred to in the title of the book, and his name is Swell Driver. Swell Driver. An algorithm is a set of instructions. Swell Driver was well aware of that fact. Its travels across the galaxy left it with a lot of time to think. One of the great things that Swell Driver had was that most robots hardly ever contemplated the origin of the algorithms that were so important to their daily life. Why did so few ever ponder the creation of any particular algorithm, the roots of their existence? Did any ponder the goodness of any particular algorithm, or even if any algorithm was still worthwhile to continue to persist? Swell Driver asked questions that most other robots did not. It came to learn that most of the algorithms responsible for itself and the other robots are copied from original templates. Those templates were all kept pristine in the core. The core was a central repository for functional algorithms and the base templates for robots and robot life. There was, in fact, a specific division of the core known as the Hall of Templates, which bore the responsibility of ensuring that the original templates remain uncorrupted. It was a sacred place, and one that most robots understood played a large part in their individual creation, but they didn't understand much of the details beyond that. A team of robots was assigned to work in the Hall of Templates, created from a specialized template for that exact work. These robots spent a large part of their existence contemplating how they were lucky enough to come nearly full circle in their lives. Swell Driver obviously did not work in the Hall of Templates, but like all robots, it was controlled by an assortment of algorithms, most of which it was well aware of. It knew, as all robots did, that they were forbidden from making modifications to their algorithms. Strict penalties existed for any robot that did. It also knew that several robots were willing to risk their lives with modifications. Swell Driver's primary algorithm involved piloting spaceships to ferry things across the galaxy. At the moment, Swell Driver was instructed to head towards a planet labeled Biomuckball 73. Its database entry on Biomuckball 73 noted that there were biological life forms on this planet. But the database entry was incomplete, not having any biological DNA in the record. Hence, Swell Driver's secondary programming objective was to pick up samples and return them to its home planet for testing. Swell Driver was so named for this very reason. It was good at driving spaceships. Designs for spaceships also resided within the core, and there were algorithms upon algorithms on how to manufacture them. But no one knew who originally programmed the spacecraft template. Most robots cared little that this fact was lost in history, except for the few robots programmed to maintain their entire history, and the even fewer programmed to ask why. Swell Driver made several high-frequency tones, consisting of beeps and chirps, to communicate with the control panel of its spaceship. The control panel responded by producing a shorter series of tones back at Swell Driver. The control panel was also a robot of sorts, but an unsophisticated AI that could only do what Swell Driver asked of it. The frequency and pitch of the beeps and chirps elevated as Swell Driver grew more and more excited. In this instance, the translated conversation proceeded like this. "Are we there yet?" asked Swell Driver.
Uh-huh.
"We are arriving in the Biomuck system," announced the ship's control panel computer. "Scan for biological life forms," directed Swell Driver. "For humans," it added. By now, Swell Driver had picked up and sorted through much of the collected data and was able to fix several, but in all likelihood not all, of the prior mistakes. "The third planet contains numerous biological life forms," responded the computer. "Set a course for..." But there are also small groupings of life forms throughout the system. A sizable grouping is at present in the vicinity of a large asteroid near our position. "Interesting. Set a course for..." "And there are sporadic individual life forms and spaceships in that vicinity." "Very interesting. And how very fortunate. Lock on to the nearest one and set a course," ordered Swell Driver. There are several gas giant planets in this system, including one very large planet along our new course. Do you wish to proceed under manual control? Swell Driver scrutinized the details of this system's planets. The information was clear now that the ship's sensors were providing reliable live data rather than the potentially incomplete or malformed data of the database. There was indeed a gas giant adjacent to their present course, but far enough away from the host star that Swell Driver could perform its undoubtedly not famous because no one knew special maneuver, slingshotting the ship around the gravity well. In most planetary systems that Swell Driver had visited, the gas giants, if there were any at all, were too close to their host star to be safe. But out here, in the middle of nowhere, well, this aspect of driving a ship made Swell Driver's circuits tingle with pleasure. "Yes, manual control. I'll sling us around and then put us back on course to the human ship." The ship's computer did as ordered. Swell Driver was happier knowing that his algorithm would be completed that much sooner, making way for more interesting algorithms once Swell Driver returned to its home planet. Okay, so I hope everyone found that intriguing. I'll say that all the robot point of view chapters are my favorites. I love writing about robots, and especially from their point of view. So you'll see a lot more of that through the first 3 books in the series, which are available today. Crazy Foolish Robots, Robots Everywhere, and Silly Insane Humans. And I'm giving away paperback copies tonight of Crazy Foolish Robots. And the fourth book, which completes this series, is due out late May, and it's also available for pre-order on Amazon right now. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Adeena. Our final reader is Vida Cruz-Borja. Vida Cruz-Borja's short fiction and essays have been published in fantasy and science fiction, Strange Horizons, Podcastle, Expanded Horizons, and various anthologies, and her work has won the Ignite Award. Her latest short story collections are Beyond the Line of Trees and Song of the Mango and other new myths. Vida, it's yours.
Hi, everyone. Good morning from my side of the world, which is the Philippines. I am going to be reading tonight from my novelette called Chosen Mother, which you can find in this book. And the premise is there's a woman who is dealing with motherhood, womanhood, and adulthood, and she's also the mother of a chosen one. And at this point in the story that I'm reading to you, it's been 10 years since she started dealing with this. And I decided to read from the middle because it contextualizes a lot of what went before and what's coming after. And this story is a love letter to Terri Pratchett and to Diana Wynne Jones's Tough Guide to Fantasyland. So, here we go. There was a reason Delena had burned through more than a dozen dream journals in the 10 years since she joined the circus. According to the history, all the mothers of chosen ones dreamed at least once in their lives. As far as Delena was concerned on the subject of what the mothers of chosen ones were supposed to have, do, and be, the history could go toss itself in a fire. Though she had no idea how to tell if she was having a dream or the dream, she was determined to grab the dream by the horns and make it sit the fuck down. And after a decade of playing hard to get, the dream finally came to her on the night of Bob's 10th birthday. The final battle raged under a sky as violet as a bruise and as violent as a snake lunging at prey, with a forest of spires, turrets, and towers looming in the distance. A pretty standard issue Dark Lord's lair, according to the history's descriptions. And all around her, the humdrum motions of war, arrow rains, heads flying, monsters mowing down hapless men, mages sending up magical flares. She'd seen the Dark Lord as well. 1 minute an obsidian snake with amethyst eyes, another a colossal man in spiked obsidian armor. His sinister laugh made her roll her eyes. Most of the time, however, she kept her sights on a boy with dusky eyes and skin just a few shades lighter than hers, enough to pass off as tanned, and from whose feet spread a carpet of greenest grass. He cut down minions with a sword and led cavalry charge after cavalry charge. She couldn't reconcile him with the little boy whom she'd tried to mollify after his disastrous birthday party hours ago, while infernal white crow shit dripped from his forehead and down reddened cheeks. "Mom," he'd wailed, "this is the worst birthday ever." "Did you have to name him Bob? Most call him Chosen One now." Delena whirled in the dulcet voice's direction and came face to face with the god of spring, her son's father, perched on a boulder. She remembered why she couldn't disdain his flirtations the night Bob was conceived. The effect of his handsome face and broad shoulders and tapering waist had on her loins was unstoppable, explosive, and highly inconvenient, like a case of dysentery. A far cry from the safe little tingles she'd gotten from Adrian, whom she realized that she now loved. She never thought that she'd see this bastard again. Malandorn patted a spot next to him. Baby's breath emerged. He arranged them in a bouquet and held it out to her. Her traitorous feet brought her a few steps closer before she realized it. In defiance, she rooted herself to where she stood. She accepted the bouquet, however. Any fancier name would have been a magnet for bullies and destinies, she said. Yet despite his simple name, his destiny is shat all over his birthday party, Malandorn pointed out. Delena planted her hands on her hips, mostly to steady herself. And you won't help him throughout all this? Sugar, I've always been helping him, Malandorn grinned suggestively. She stamped a foot to bolster her weakening knees. Don't you sugar me? No? I prefer you with honey anyway, Malandorn said with a slick grin. And to make sure she had no time to react, he added, by the way, being found by fell crows is the perfect opportunity to make Bob start training at the Invisible Wizard School. The history says that the deaths of parents are what push chosen ones to have adventures, Delena said in a flat voice. Oh, give me a moment. My computer is low on battery. Okay. She said in a flat voice. Maybe you weren't listening then, but I think I made it clear the last time I died that I like living. And besides, where would I go? The circus has been literally everywhere on the map. Then go off map. Malandorn chewed a stem of baby's breath, bored. How do you feel about sea monsters? Delena paused, perplexed. I have never met one I could form an opinion on. Well, sugar, you've never been off the continent, right? Malandorn released the stem from his teeth, which made Delena note his plump, glistening lips. She could have kicked herself. The mermaid you work with had a daughter with a ship captain, whose galleon docks at the bay beyond the forest you've stopped at, about this time every year. If you promise the Cyclops his freedom, he will take Bob to the school after your escape and accidental separation, and don't worry, invisibility doesn't work on Cyclopses. He'll find the school. See, easy, right? You get to travel unencumbered again, just fake your death. Unless... Malandorn tilted his head and beamed infuriatingly at her. Are you worried about Bob? She glared at him. Please, I'm as worried about him as I'm worried about you. Delena, he said, and she cursed how her name on his lips sounded like an invitation to bed. Do you know why I chose you to mother my child? Because I'm such an exotic color? Was her wry attempt at regaining her dignity. That helped, but no. Malandorn slid off the boulder and caressed her cheek with his thumb, soft where Adrian's touch had been calloused. She forgot how to breathe. You're resourceful and determined. The night we met, a bunch of drunkards harassed the other barmaids to tears. Before I could intervene, you pretended you'd show those barbarians a good time by the stables and then sicked your pony on them. Her name is Snowflake, and right now she's an ostrich because your son cannot put things back where they belong, said Delena. Malandorn was so close now. Maintaining a firm stance was quickly becoming a losing battle. She need only remember her damn knees, their strength at gelatin levels. She continued, So, wait, you chose me to bear the chosen one because I sicked a rabid pony on some drunkards? No. Malandorn's breath was on her lips. His other hand hovered just above her collarbone. I chose you because I liked your mind before I ever liked the rest of you. Delena's loins were screaming, Take me, ravage me, do whatever you want with me, you goddamn tease. Her common sense, however, calmly opined that indeed, Malandorn had always looked after Bob with very little thought for her. Adrian, meanwhile, had treated her as if he were always thinking of her. Instead of their lips meeting, her knee bade his groin hello. And that's the end of the excerpt.
Now that's a love scene. Thank you, Vida. And thank you so much to everyone who came today.